going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for week 1 of the NFL season. We're finally back to some pigskin action. Gonna get you guys ready for all the action for the Sunday main slate, both from the DFS and the prop side of things, so we can have ourselves a solid start to the year. And for the DFS side, we're gonna go through my top stacks, a few game environments that I'm looking to get well over the field on. We're trying to find some correlation, find ourselves towards the top end of those GPPs and at low ownership as well, so you don't have to hold hands with 10 to 15% at the same time. And then afterwards, we're going to look through the prop and the betting side of things. That'll be the pick'em sites like Underdog and PrizePicks, go through a few bets that I've already mixed in myself, as well as some strategy when trying to be profitable over there. So by the end, you'll have a game plan on how to attack the Sunday main slate so we can have ourselves a solid 2025. So without further ado, let's not waste any time at all and start off with, first off, those top stacks for the week 1 main slate. And while not every single lineup of mine is going to be built with a full QB stack, a lot of my large field GPP lineups will, because the correlation that's involved with getting over the field on a game environment can oftentimes be what it takes to get to the large field GPP optimal lineup. And what I mean by that, by a team stack, is when you take a quarterback, maybe you pair him up with 1 to 2 pass catching options from the same team, and then you run it back with maybe 1 to 2 players from the other side of that game. We call that getting over the field on that game environment. And when that shoots out, maybe it's a close competitive game throughout the entire game, sometimes you'll get 20 to 30 point scores across the board. You'll get, 150 point core between 4 to 5 players that can take you towards the top end of those GPPs. And not your entire lineup's going to be built around one specific game. In fact, a lot of times it's just me going with one quarterback, maybe one wide receiving option from that team, and then one buyback as me quote unquote getting that game stack. But even then, it's extremely useful. And there are going to be a few lineups where I take a quarterback that's more rushing heavy and perhaps don't stack it around that sort of game environment, and maybe it is just kind of taking random players from each different game on the slate. But those kind of lineups I usually don't enter as often. I'm more so the kind of player that correlates, and that's why we focus on that stack, because not only can we try and find game environments that are likely to go over that implied total, but also get them at lower ownership numbers. So let's start off with our first stack of the week. There's going to be Baker Mayfield going against that Atlanta Falcons defense, and some of these players here I'll be taking the other side as well. So for example, in this first game between the Buccaneers and the Falcons, I will also be playing some Michael Penix lineups, but the key differentiator between a Baker Mayfield lineup and a Michael Penix one is that you feel a lot better about the Baker Mayfield side. They are, of course, the favorites between those two teams. They have the higher implied team total as well, and at $6,600, Baker was one of the best fantasy QBs in all of 2024, and while Penix did impress in his last start or two of 2024, he has far less experience and is a far less reliable fantasy option than what we have here. Now, he's cheaper, right? That is going to make a big difference on the rest of your lineup. But for the sake of my higher dollar lineups, some of my single entries, or even my larger field $5 or $25 150 max exposure, I'm going to have more Baker Mayfield this week. And partially that's because of the higher floor, but also the ceilings there. You've got players like Evans, Egbuka that you can match him up with, a Kadon if you want to use a tight end, or maybe even one of the running backs as, hoping that he gets a out of the backfield touchdown or something like that, and that takes him to the optimal lineup. There are a ton of options that you can use for the stack. And then on the buyback side of things, you have all those Falcons players as well. You've got your Bijan Robinsons, your Drake Londons, Darnell Mooney's, Kyle Pitts that are even play as a buyback. So I could see myself easily having 15 to maybe even 20% exposure to Baker Mayfield, and he's only 4% projected owned in the large field GPPs. So I would say if you're into single entry, that's going to give you a ton of leverage right there. Even if you're on some of the chalkier stacking options like an Evans or a Egbuka, or even a Bijan Robinson or a London as your buyback, even if you're taking somebody that's 15 to 20% owned, which would probably be a stretch for a majority of those players, but there might be 1 or 2 of those guys that gets close to 15%. Even if you do stack them up with the chalkiest possible players in that sort of game environment, that 4% ownership is going to do wonders for your leverage. And while a lot of the player pool stuff is blacked out, by the way, these spreadsheets can be found on my Patreon page. The biggest no-brainer in the industry, in my opinion, by the way, it's only $15 to join the DFS tier that I have over there, and it gives you access to every single main slate sheet, every single showdown slate that I cover here on the YouTube. That'll be at least 12 showdown slates per month, by the way. Also, every single main slate, 4 or 5, depending on the month. So less than $1 per slate for access to these spreadsheets. And, even if you're only entering like $5 per slate, that is still a no-brainer. The $15 membership to my website is peanuts compared to elsewhere. Most other sites are at least $75 $75, even $100 to $150 a month, depending on some of the packages that you have out there. And my site has the same, if not more information than all of those other sites for a fraction of the cost. So even if you're, a smaller stakes player that's not entering, $100+ every single slate, if anything, these are the kind of sites, especially my site, that you want to be a part of. You don't want to be spending $100 a month on your projections. I mean, you're only entering $50 to maybe $100 a month on your entries. That's where a site like mine really comes in handy. It's much more reasonable for those sort of players. But even if you are a high stakes player that's entering thousands of dollars of every single slate, you don't need to be giving away a vast or a big portion of your bankroll every single month just to get the projections that may or may not even give you that success. Some of them out there don't have the most accurate projections. I vet them all the time, especially as somebody in the industry. I pride myself on the product that I put out there. And again, it's only $15 to join. So it's, at least worth checking out, at least worth trying out, in my opinion, an absolute no-brainer there. And vast majority of the people that sign up for my product end up staying for the long term because they see how good of a deal and just how much of a no-brainer it is to join. So if you guys want to check out the Patreon sheet, want to see all the projections that I'm doing, check out the link down below. But there are players like Penix that are in that player pool too. Not every single quarterback I'm using is going to be a quarterback stack like this. That's why I talk about whether I'm using them in the team stack. By the way, not every single stack is going to have a buyback as well. There could be some teams where the other side of it just has all overpriced guys or guys that I can't really see getting there. Maybe a more spread out exposure, more spread out target share on the other side of things, where I'm not always going with the buyback. So that's what's great about these spreadsheets, is that I give you guys every single piece of info that I possibly have, both on the projection side, my player pool side as well, but also how I'm deploying all of these given players. And, there'll be a lot of sites out there that'll give you an idea of their top quarterbacks of the week. Maybe they'll talk about even their core plays per se, but they won't tell you how they're deploying them, right? That's the difference with my website compared to all those other ones, is that I give you that correlation. I tell you exactly the sort of players that I'm pairing up with each player. And, if I'm only using 2 players along with that quarterback, or only using 1 player along with them in every single lineup, I let people know that here in that team stack tab. So if you guys haven't already seen the Patreon page, I'd highly recommend checking it out. And Baker Mayfield going to be one of my top stacks of the week. Next up, we've got Jordan Love at $6,100. He's going against the Detroit Lions defense. And by the way, that first game, one of the highest totals of the week as well. That was kind of implied, I suppose, with all these different stacks. But same thing with the second game. The Packers-Lions game is in the high 40s with implied team total, and it's only 3% owned in large field GPP. So just like we had with Baker, not expecting him to get a whole lot of love from the masses, which likely has to do with the price tag. There's a lot of really good quarterbacks in this range, and not all of them can get the ownership. In fact, you've got your Kyler Murrays, your Bo Nix, your Brock Purdy's that also project for a similar points per dollar projection. But the difference between some of these game environments and then the Jordan Love and the Lions one is that you have the higher total though, and it's a more competitive game script. You've got 2 teams that are expected to be in the playoffs, 2 teams that could even be in the Super Bowl hunt by the end of the year, especially the Packers after they ended up getting Micah Parsons. Might not be 100% for week number 1, but these are 2 top level teams going at it. And if they have their fastball, if they've got, some of the kinks out of the system by the time they get to week number 1, this could be a 55 to a 60 plus point game, which would be massive from the fantasy angle. So just like the first game where I have some Penix exposure, I'm also going to have some Jared Goff. Now, the reason why Jordan Love is the player that we're using as the core play here, the player that I'm using as one of my top 3 stacks of the week, is that he's cheaper, right? He's about $400 cheaper. You can see the points per dollar projection on Jared Goff is a little bit lower than some of the other quarterbacks around him. Not to say that you still can't get there in large field GPPs. These are median projections. That's not what we're hoping for in the large field GPPs. If we're going to be an optimal play, somebody you have to have in the $5 or $25 GPP, well, you're going to have a ceiling performance. So this median projection isn't like the worst thing to ever see in the world, especially when he's only 1.7% owned. But if I was playing in a single entry, something where I didn't have to force in as much differentiation, Jordan Love's the player that I want. The points per dollar projection is a lot more reasonable, and you still have all the stacking options on either side. So just like the first game where you have a lot of premier wide receivers, tight ends, running backs that you can use in conjunction, it's the same thing in this second stack as well. On the Packers side, you've got Jaden Reed at wide receiver. Golden's probably the wide receiver you really want for week 1 just because he's healthy and Reed is dealing with that little bit of a fracture. You have Tucker Kraft at tight end, Romeo Doubs with some of the injuries at wide receiver for Green Bay. He'll probably play quite a bit as well. And even Josh Jacobs, who's not the most receiving heavy heavy running back, but has started to catch a few more balls for Green Bay over the last year or so, could be used as a stacking option too. Now, what's worth noting is with some of these running backs, like even in Irving or White in that first stack that we had with the Buccaneers, is that they don't want to be your primary stacking option. So for example, if you're going with one of those two quarterbacks and then just going with a one-off player along with them, you probably don't want it to be a running back. You want that to more so be that wide receiver / tight end that has that correlation. But if you're looking for a second player to add on top of it, that's where those running backs really come in handy. And on the other side of things, if we're looking for a buyback again is just taking a player from the other side of things, hoping that it shoots out. It's a close competitive game and that there's fantasy viable options from both sides of it. We have Amon-Ra St. Brown. We've got the two running backs, Jahmyr Gibbs, also David Montgomery. You have JMO. We also have Sam Laporta at the tight end position that's usable too. That's the thing with these two lineups is that you have a lot of chalk. Like these skill position players on both sides, especially the Lions skill position players, are likely going to be some of the chalkiest players at their given positions. Same thing for like Evans Egbuka. Like Egbuka at that price tag is going to be extremely popular this week. Bijan Robinson, a London, even a Mooney if he's healthy, he's going to get played in some large field GPPs. The thing that's great about these is these quarterbacks offset it, right? We're not taking the 15% owned Jane Daniels. We're not taking the 13% owned Trevor Lawrence. And it's still early in the week. We're going to have to see where these ownership projections trend. I do have to say that if I'm seeing value in these quarterbacks, I'd have to think that other people are going to see it as well, as they have the high team totals. They're at lower ownership projections right now. But assuming that they maybe steam up to like 4, maybe 5% at the very most, I would still much rather have these guys that are half, even a third of the ownership of some of the other players around them and be able to take some of the chalkier skill position players along with them. So that's part of the way that I go out there and I differentiate some of my builds, is that if I want to use some of the chalkier guys on the slate, I pair them up with a low-owned quarterback or a low-owned defense. And the last stack that we're going to use here for week one, a lot of other quarterbacks I'm playing, of course, but do have to keep a lot of those behind the paywall on the Patreon. So again, link down below, absolute no-brainer to join if you guys haven't already, to see exactly who I'm using. And all these other tabs, we're not going to be able to go through those on there as I don't have them censored, but I've got all the running back, wide receiver, tight end, and defense projections, of course, down there too. But the last stack that we have here is a little bit more atypical. It's a lot cheaper. It's only $4,900, and that would be Joe Flacco going up against the Bengals. Another extremely high team total. I believe it's like 1 point lower than those other two that we've already pointed out. But the price tag is a big deal here, because if you want to spend up for some of the premier running backs, some of the premier wide receivers that we have on the slate, then you're going to have to make up for that salary elsewhere. And while the pricing is probably softer than it will be for most of the season, week one, they try and make it a little bit easier for your casuals to build lineups and to not overload them with too much information right off the bat. So it's not as big of a deal as it will be in like 3 or 4 weeks when a $4,900 quarterback is going to be extremely useful. But even then, it is useful in spots, particularly if you want to stack like 2 of the 7 to 8K running backs. And what you get along with it is a game script that should be extremely favorable. Not only is it one of the higher totals on the week, but they are very big underdogs. And while I don't necessarily think that this is going to be a close competitive game the entire time, Joe Flacco and the Browns are probably going to have to pass for most of the game. You've got the Bengals as the big favorites, one of the Super Bowl favorites for the year as well, maybe the most productive offense that we're expecting in all of 2025. So Joe Flacco gets down by a touchdown or two early, he could throw the ball 40 to 50 times this game. And, at $4,900, we probably need at least 25 fantasy points to get there. The only way he's going to post 25 fantasy points, he's got no rushing upside, as we all know at this point, is if he throws for like 3 touchdowns and 300 plus yards, which isn't going to be something that happens very often for Joe Flacco. But the games where you're going to see that is in a high total game against a really high-paced, very efficient offense like we have on the Bengals, and also when they're playing from behind. So I think that this is one of the few times of the year where he could actually give us that optimal performance, and that would be in the large field GPPs. Like, he's capable of getting there in the $5 or the $25 GPP, let alone in single entries or some smaller field contests where you don't have to have the absolute nuts. I would say in like a single entry format that Joe Flacco is maybe an even better option for Sunday than some of the large field GPPs, because if he gets us to the 20 fantasy point mark, which is still above his projection, right? That's a borderline ceiling performance for somebody like Joe Flacco. But if he gets there, then that's going to pay off this sort of price tag, because, it's not just who you're getting with that $4,900, it's what it opens up at some of those other positions. So that's another stack that you guys might want to consider for the main slate this week. In terms of stacking options, you've got a Judy, an Njoku, a Tillman, and a Ford. I will say that for a quarterback without a whole lot of rushing upside, Same thing for Baker. Like, I'm probably going to be taking 2 pass catching options in a lot of the lineups that I use Baker. Same thing for Flacco. Like, he's not going to score us a whole bunch of rushing touchdowns. We're probably going to need, at the very least, at least one of these pass catchers, if not 2 of them mixed in. And on the other side of things, we've got one of the best offenses to attack for a buyback. We've got Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Gesicki, a Chase Brown at running back too. Probably my favorite Chase Brown out of all those different options that we just went through there that are going to cost you a lot. I mean, Brown's one of the more expensive running backs. Chase is the most expensive wide receiver that we have on the slate. So that $4,900 price tag for Flacco really comes in handy if you're trying to take one of those premier players. And because we're spending down at this position, even saving $1,500 to $2,000 compared to some of the other quarterbacks that you can take, not only can you take a premier buyback, like maybe a Jamar Chase as that player that you're using from the Bengals, but also you could sneak in one of those really expensive running backs that we were talking about before. So these are just a few of the games that I'll be looking to get over the field on. Mentioned, I'll be using some Jared Goff, also some Michael Penix. I will probably use some Joe Burrow, but it is a $2,000 difference in salary. And if we wanted to go like Burrow, then maybe Higgins, and then another player on the Bengals, you don't have nearly as much salary. So I will probably still have some exposure to Joe Burrow on the other side of that game, but not nearly as much in my single entries and some of my smaller field stuff. That would be a little bit more of a large field GPP play. If you take a look at his track record from the last few seasons, there have been games where Burrow's gone for like 40 plus fantasy points, throwing for 5-6 touchdowns, 500 plus yards. You're going to have him when that happens. So I'm okay mixing him in short spurts to some of those large field GPP contests. But these core plays, the ones I'm going to be relying on a little bit more in some of those smaller field contests. So for the rest of my player pool, you guys can find that over there on the Patreon page, as well as for all the different positions on Sunday. And now for the prop and betting side of things, where we're going to get you ready for all of your pick'em exposure. And before we talk through a few props that I've already entered, I do want to remind you guys of my process for the football side, because a lot of you guys have probably followed me for golf, and it is a vastly different process than what I use for over there. Football is a much bigger market, also a market where I trust the sportsbook odds a whole lot more, not only because they have much bigger teams on these sportsbooks setting these lines, but also because there's a lot more money being bet on these markets. I'm talking 10 to even 100x the volume that we have for our golf slate. So unlike DraftKings FanDuel for golf, where sometimes I throw it out there, go, I don't really care about that all whatsoever. Football, I really take this market data extremely seriously. In fact, I look at a lot of the market trends, try and figure out when we're going to see bumps on these prop sites, and I try and beat them before they end up getting to that. So it's a little bit of a different sort of respect that I give to the lines makers on this side of things. Still do use my traditional analysis. That's still a massive part of what I do, but the sportsbook line value, a much bigger part of what we're going to look at here. So speaking of, let's go through the first slip that we're going to take for Sunday, which is going to be a 2-man over here on Underdog. So this is a 3x payout on both of these, and they would both be considered plus EV leans if we're looking at Pinnacle. So the sportsbook that I trust the most, by the way, for my football stuff would be Pinnacle Sportsbook. Not only do they have the most fair odds, also the most specific odds of any of the major sportsbooks out there, but they oftentimes drive a lot of the line movement on other sites. They have a lot of the fish playing on it because they don't limit like a lot of the other sportsbooks do. They're essentially the prop Circa Sports of what we have in the regulated gaming industry. And, Circa, for some of their sides, they'll take really big bets, but they'll adjust the lines to, kind of account for that. That's the same exact idea that we have with Pinnacle. So that's why I give them a little bit more respect. They're, of course, a European book as opposed to American. So I would say that they're the sharpest that we have on that side of the pond. And they have Baker Mayfield at 22.5 completions, and he's minus 130 towards the over. And a lot of the other books that do have Baker at 21.5 completions have him juiced slightly towards the over as well. So that's sort of consensus. And if you take a look at a lot of the books, they all have him as a slight lean towards the over, has him at close to effective minus 142 odds towards the over, which is why I went ahead and mixed this in. And I mean, that was already a game that's supposed to have a high total. We're expecting it to be close and relatively competitive too. Those are things that are massive when it comes to completions. And considering that his 32.5 attempt line is also juiced a little bit towards the over, they're expecting him to be putting the ball in the air quite often. So anytime we're getting a whole one discrepancy and some juice towards the over on Pinnacle, that's going to be a spot that I'm looking to run out there and enter. And I would expect this to bump at some point, whether it goes to 21.5 and a multiplier towards the over, like a 0.8 or 0.9x multiplier, or even bumps the whole way up to 22.5. A whole one bump difference would be massive for the CLV and the kind of value that we're mixing in here. And even if it is just a multiplier change, that is still massive too. And, some people try and enter big parlays, 4 or 5 mans. I try and beat the sports books by death by 1,000 paper cuts. I try and get as much small pieces of value that I possibly can, and I mix them in primarily in 2 and 3 leg slips, sometimes 4 or 5 leg slips, but I always go with the insurance if I'm going with one of those longer parlays, because I'm not trying to break the sports book back on one night, right? I'm not one of those people on Twitter that's entering plus 500,000 parlays, right? Trying to enter $5 on it and then change their life. That is extremely unlikely to happen. It's going to take a lot of up and down swings to make that work. If you have a proven edge and if you can try and find this plus EV value and catch it before it moves, then you don't have to go out there and hit a 4 or 5 leg parlay, right? You can rack up the units slowly and surely over time, and that is what my process is all about. So just like I was saying for the fantasy side of things, I do also post every single piece of prop exposure and betting exposure over on my Patreon page, not only on the pick'em sites like Underdog and PrizePicks. We're going to talk through a PrizePicks slip here in a second as well, but also all the sportsbook stuff that I enter on top of it. And something that we got in Florida last year for the first full season was sportsbook props to use on Hard Rock Bets. So that's also a website that I'm looking to get value on. Always going to be posting those on the Patreon page as well as I'm entering given slips over there. So if you're on these pick'em sites or if you're a part of the sports books, also a no-brainer to join. Only $15 for a month for all the different prop analysis that I do. And if you're somebody that enters DFS lineups and enters over here on the prop side of things, you can take the $25 NFL tier where it gives you access to both sides of things for a $5 discount. So, again, $25, even if you're signing up for both sides of things, is peanuts compared to the other websites out there. I mean, $75 is pretty much the bare minimum that you'll see in any of the other websites. You're getting much better value out of my website, much better data, actually profitable picks when it comes to golf. I'm limited to $25 on Underdog. I'm limited to $5 on PrizePicks. I've supplied proof plenty of times before. We've done it on live stream before where I show you, right, where my max entry is. They don't do that to losing bettors. They do that to people that have been consistently winning against the books. If you want to pay $75 to $150 a month for people that are losing bettors, for people that aren't limited like I am, then, go ahead, right? I don't choose what you do with your money, but it's an absolute no-brainer to join somebody's site like my own. So whether it's the tail the slips for your own, be able to take advantage of that exposure, or even just learn how to be a better of football in the process, you're going to get a whole lot of value out of it, right? Whether it's the profitable picks that we're putting out, or even just being able to learn where to find value for yourself, you can use that for many seasons to come. So check it out if you guys haven't already. Again, link down below. Prop tier, as they get access to all these bets that we're going through. And then another prop I mixed in, I actually took this on PrizePicks, but we had a bumps already happen. And by the way, that's the thing with my picks. 90% of them are going to bump. So before you join, just know that ahead of time, is that we're taking value. That's the reason why we're betting them, but they usually bump in an hour or more. So it takes them quite a bit of time to move, but you also want to see that on your props, right? If you're betting stuff and it's not moving at some point, then you're probably not taking the best value. You're not locking in that CLV that you're hoping for, but that is why we're taking Collins here on the Underdog side. So he's minus 142 towards over on Pinnacle. And like I was saying earlier with my process, a lot of times these other sports books kind of adjust what they post on Pinnacle because they know that there's more action over there. They know that they're going to, not limit people and let them bet what they want on those given sides. So if a site like Pinnacle is showing this much respect to Nico Collins and putting him at minus 140 plus towards the over, expect to see some sort of adjustment from some of the other major sports books too. And at 5.5 receptions, this is an extremely reasonable line. Not only was he covering this with ease when he was healthy in 2024, but he's also the clear number one wide receiver. You've got the rookie Jane Higgins, who I don't think early in the year is going to be a massive factor. You also have Christian Kirk, who's a new face in town, who's technically their wide receiver 2 right now. I believe Higgins is listed as 3. Those two have much less experience with CJ Stroud and much less familiarity in this Texans offense. Somebody like Collins could, probably read the plays off the back of his mind, even without looking at a playbook this fall. Probably already knew all the plays that they're going to be running this year, or at least the vast majority of them. I have no concerns about the chemistry between him and CJ Stroud. So, he should be healthy. He's had plenty of time to recover from that gruesome injury that he had towards the beginning of last year. And this 5.5 reception line, and what is one of the, it's not one of the highest totals that we have on the week, that Texans versus Rams game, but it is in the upper half of the totals that we have on the slate. They're expecting a good amount of offense between those two teams. And the added caveat, or the cherry on top for this one, is that it's a relatively close game as well. The spread is one of the closer ones that we have on the entire Sunday slate. So I'm liking the kind of value that we have on that 2-man. So that's a little 3x slip. while we're not going to be taking a correlated slip here, correlation is massive on the football side as well. So Underdog does have better rules for encapsulating that correlation. If you take 2 props that are correlated on Underdog, they do give you a lower payout, which I would say is pretty sharp. That's to be expected on a lot of these bigger sports books. But PrizePicks isn't the best about doing that sort of thing. So what we're going to do over here, and this is going to be for Sunday Night Football, which I will have a video on, by the way, a whole separate video for Sunday Night Football. But I think these props are going to bump. So I want to put them out there now, even for the main slate video, just so you guys can see not only what I do for correlation, but also try and get these before they have a multiplier on them. Because just like the first video we did for the Thursday Night Football game, which is tomorrow night, that prop with Jalen Hurts ended up bumping. And, you know, it's pretty easy to see when this stuff's going to kind of happen. And it has to do with the odds on these two. So both of them are at least minus 135 for their over on Pinnacle. So they're starting to get close to that plus EV range. And this is before any of the general public is coming out to bet this game. And if you guys didn't know, this Sunday Night Football game is an absolute banger. I mean, we've got the Buffalo Bills, and we've got Baltimore Ravens going at it. I mean, 2 of the best teams, if not 1 and 2 for the Super Bowl contention this year. I mean, I guess you have to have the Eagles and the Chiefs up there in that top 4 as well. But 2 top 5 teams undoubtedly here in 2025 that are going head to head. The casual public is going to bet their overs. I can promise you that. And even before then, this is already juiced heavily towards the over. They've got the high total, the correlation between these two. And for example, if you were to take these two in Underdog, which I'll just show you what that actually looks like here. Just 1 second, let's go down to this bottom game. It's only going to pay you a little bit over a 2x payout if you took them together. So the payout difference is just insane between the two sites. Look at that. It's only 2.01x if we took them here on the Underdog side. It is a full 3x payout here in PrizePicks. So not only are you not getting that correlation ding, which oftentimes you get on a lot of these other sites. I mean, even sportsbooks, if you do a same game parlay, right? They're going to give you some negative value on these. We're getting minus 135 to what I think will probably be minus 140 plus odd props by the time that we get there to Sunday night after all the casual money ends up coming in on them. So love the value there, love the correlation that we're getting between the two. And yeah, technically not a main slate game, so I guess a little bit of extra content that we're doing here for this video, but I did want to show you guys an example of what that correlation looks like. And on 2-man slips, it is a bit limited, right? There's only so much correlation when you have 2 data points, but when we're running 4 to 5 leg slips and we're running the insurance on a bigger slip, having correlation is massive, and especially when you're running with multiple data points at the same time. So check out the Patreon for every single piece of exposure that I'm entering, guys. A lot that we've already entered at this point, and I mean, it's only a Wednesday, right? We've got a whole lot of time left this week to add even more exposure. So to get all of that, to get access to every single piece of betting exposure that I enter, join the Patreon page down below. Alrighty, guys, that's all I've got for this week's DFS and prop preview. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and for a chance to earn a free month access to my Patreon page, give me your top score on the Sunday main slate. That's going to be for Draftkings scoring and the top overall score. Whoever ends up guessing that first will win a free month access to my Patreon. So go ahead, give me your guess down below before anyone ends up stealing your player. Best of luck with all the exposure that you guys are getting to. Whether it's in those large field GPPs, I hope to see a lot of your names and logos towards the very top. And also over there on the prop and betting side of things, let's cash out. Let's get this year started out there into the green and pad that bankroll a little bit. But I'm looking forward to it. It's an absolute epic week ahead. Best of luck, as I was saying before, and I'll see you guys for all the content throughout the rest of the week.